Hey guys! Tonight we are heading back to the smoky streets of Victorian London, where the air is thick with coal dust and the night stretches on forever under the faint glow of gas lamps. You can imagine yourself wandering down a cobblestoned lane, the rattle of carriage wheels echoing faintly, while the city refuses to sleep. For many Victorians, insomnia was more than just a bad night. It was almost a cultural condition. Restless minds, nervous bodies, and a society in constant upheaval meant that an enormous number of people found themselves staring at the ceiling long after midnight. And unlike you, with your endless streaming services and doom-scrolling habits, they didn't even have cat videos to keep them company. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this sleepless century without Wi-Fi. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening somewhere unusual, maybe in a city that never sleeps like New York or a quiet coastal town in New Zealand, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself drifting further into the maze of London's alleys. Gaslight hisses softly in iron lanterns, the fog curling around lampposts like pale ghosts. In the distance, you hear the faint murmur of voices. Factory workers finishing late shifts, cabmen waiting for a fare, and behind lace curtains, the sighs of sleepless Victorians trying everything from herbal teas to pacing their bedrooms in despair. A mainstream historical fact here. By the mid-19th century, insomnia was often classified as a medical problem of nerves, a catch-all diagnosis that reflected both the stresses of industrial life and the limited scientific understanding of sleep. Doctors wrote about it in journals, moralists fretted over it in essays, and regular people whispered about it as if it were a curse of modern living. Quirky tidbit? Some Victorians believed insomnia was caused by eating too much rich pudding before bed. Imagine blaming custard tarts for your tossing and turning. It's almost charming until you realize people were deadly serious about it. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of insomnia was exaggerated by doctors eager to treat it, or whether the sleeplessness truly spiked due to industrial schedules, artificial light, and caffeine-laden diets. Either way, walking these streets, you sense how many minds are wide awake. You pass a townhouse where a gentleman sits at his desk, quill scratching as he laments in his diary about another night of horrid wakefulness. Next door, a mother rocks her baby, sipping weak tea as her eyes droop. Across the way, a clerk mutters prayers over a glass of warm milk, hoping divine intervention will make the liquid more powerful than it really is. And you, strolling through the haze, realize that insomnia wasn't just a private battle. It was woven into the fabric of Victorian nights. Every rattle of carriage wheels, every drip of gaslight, every restless sigh becomes part of a great urban chorus of wakefulness. The city itself seems sleepless, breathing heavily under its blanket of soot and fog, while its people toss, turn, and search desperately for cures. And so your journey begins, not with sleep, but with the endless search for it, and the peculiar, often laughable ways Victorians tried to coax themselves into slumber. The night grows heavier as you follow the trail of insomnia deeper into Victorian drawing rooms, bedrooms, and doctors' offices. Here, sleep is no longer just a matter of personal restlessness. It's a medical case file waiting to be inspected. You sit quietly in a consulting room, the ticking of a pocket watch filling the silence while a physician peers at his patient with an expression that is equal parts pity and professional curiosity. Doctors of the 19th century loved their pocket watches, and they also loved timing things. If a patient complained of lying awake until 3 in the morning, you can picture the doctor nodding gravely, snapping his watch shut and declaring it a most serious disorder of the nerves. A mainstream historical fact here. Victorian medicine classified sleeplessness under the umbrella of neurasthenia, a vague diagnosis that covered everything from anxiety to indigestion to sheer boredom. It was often blamed on the overstimulation of city life, gas lamps extending the day, newspapers flooding the mind with information, even train rides rattling the nervous system out of balance. Doctors treated insomnia as both a symptom and a disease, offering remedies that ranged from stern lectures about lifestyle to bizarre experimental concoctions. Quirky tidbit? Some physicians actually instructed patients to count the ticks of their pocket watches instead of sheep. The idea was that the steady rhythm might lull the mind into drowsiness. Realistically, it probably just made people more aware of how painfully slow the night was passing. Historians still argue whether Victorian doctors genuinely believed they were curing patients or whether they were simply improvising with the limited tools they had. Medicine at the time was a strange blend of science, superstition, and good old-fashioned guesswork, and insomnia, elusive as ever, sat right in the middle of that spectrum. You glance around the room, shelves lined with glass jars of powders, vials of dark liquid, and little handwritten labels boasting names like soothing draught or nervine tonic. The doctor paces, perhaps suggesting warm milk, perhaps prescribing opiates, or perhaps simply advising the patient to think calmer thoughts. Yes, as if anyone has ever won that battle at 2 in the morning. Outside the consulting room, patients share their stories in whispers. One woman swears she hasn't slept properly since her husband bought a louder clock. Another insists her sleeplessness comes from the unnatural vibrations of the railway line near her home. A clerk mutters that his employer's endless demands keep him awake, though he phrases it more delicately to avoid sounding ungrateful. And through it all, the physicians nod gravely, pocket watches gleaming, recording the mysteries of the sleepless. You realize how much authority these doctors wielded. To say the doctor prescribed it gave weight to even the oddest cures. People timed their naps, measured their milk precisely, even rearranged their furniture, all because a man in a waistcoat with a silver watch said it might help. And you, sitting there in the hush of the consulting room, understand that the Victorian war on insomnia was not fought only in bedrooms. It was fought in offices like this, under the solemn gaze of doctors who insisted they had the key, if only you obeyed. The clock ticks louder now, echoing in your head, until you can't decide whether it's soothing or maddening. Perhaps that was the point, to leave you so dizzied by time itself that eventually, out of sheer exhaustion, you might collapse into sleep. You leave the doctor's consulting room and step back into the lamplit street, where the air smells faintly of soot and boiled cabbage. But this time, you don't head toward another physician or apothecary. You head into the warm, flickering glow of a household kitchen. Here, the cure is not a mysterious vial or a Latin prescription. It's a cup of something you've probably rolled your eyes at more than once: warm milk. The scene is almost homely. A small copper pan sits over a coal fire, the milk inside steaming gently as a woman stirs it with a wooden spoon. The air carries the sweet, slightly grassy scent of dairy mingling with coal smoke. You sit at the table, watching her pour the milk into a thick ceramic mug. The handle is warm to the touch, the surface of the drink shimmering faintly. She sets it in front of her weary husband, who sighs, mutters a short prayer, and drinks obediently. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Warm milk was one of the most widely recommended Victorian cures for sleeplessness. Doctors praised it as nature's sedative, claiming its gentle warmth calmed the stomach and soothed the nervous system. The ritual of drinking it at night became almost as important as the milk itself, an act of slowing down, dimming lamps, and signaling to the body that the day was ending. And the quirky tidbit: some Victorians believed the milk had to be consumed by candlelight for it to truly work. The theory was that soft light and warm liquid together created a magical harmony. If you drank milk under a gas lamp, some insisted, the harsh brightness would undo all the good. Picture the frustration. Blast it, Harold! You've ruined the cure! We needed tallow candles, not gas jets. Historians still argue whether warm milk had any genuine physiological effect, or whether it was purely placebo, wrapped in ritual and suggestion. After all, modern science debates whether the tryptophan in milk is even present in sufficient amounts to matter. But for Victorians, the question of science was secondary. What mattered was the feeling of slowing down, the warmth spreading from the stomach outward, the sense that at least something was being done against the tyranny of insomnia. You sip the milk yourself, and it tastes comforting, if a little bland. Maybe you're expecting magic fireworks of sleepiness, but instead you get gentle warmth that makes your eyelids droop ever so slightly. Around you, the household grows quiet. The coal fire dims, the dishes are put away, and everyone slips into nightclothes. The man with the cup of milk sighs, stretches, and finally lies down, a look of determination on his face as though sheer willpower plus dairy will conquer his restless nights. And you realize sometimes sleep cures are less about chemistry and more about psychology. The milk may not knock you out like a sedative, but it reminds you of childhood, of hearth and home, of something familiar and safe. In a city of chaos, That alone might be enough. You place the mug down and watch the fire flicker lower, the last curls of steam fading into the air. Outside, the city still mutters and rumbles, but in here, at least, there's a chance, just a chance, that warm milk has nudged one more Victorian towards slumber. The taste of plain warm milk lingers a little too long, so when the next kitchen door opens, you're greeted with a far more enticing aroma, nutmeg and cinnamon swirling in the steam of another bedtime cup. Here, the Victorians have decided that plain dairy is not enough, that insomnia requires a bit of spice, a touch of exotic flair, as if sleep might be coaxed more easily if the drink feels like a festive pudding in liquid form. You sit at a scarred wooden table as a woman grates nutmeg carefully over the froth of milk, the tiny curls of spice falling like golden dust. Beside her, a child sprinkles cinnamon with the gravitas of a priest performing a ritual. The result is a cup of warm, fragrant liquid that smells more like dessert than medicine. Her husband takes the first sip and closes his eyes as though transported. You suspect it's less cure and more comfort food. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Victorian recipe books and medical manuals often suggested adding warming spices to bedtime milk, arguing that nutmeg or cinnamon calmed digestion and soothed the nerves. In an era obsessed with the balance of the body's humors and the importance of temperance in diet, these spices were thought to steady the system and prevent the tossing and turning of restless nights. Quirky tidbit? Some pamphlets warned against too much nutmeg, claiming it might cause hallucinations or even fanciful dreams that disturb repose. Imagine drifting off not to peaceful slumber, but to vivid visions of dancing teapots because you were heavy-handed with the spice grater. Not quite the bedtime story you signed up for. Historians still argue whether these spice drinks were more about genuine medical logic or about importing luxury into daily life. After all, spices like nutmeg and cinnamon carried a whiff of the exotic East, a sense of sophistication. Perhaps half the cure was simply the pleasure of sipping something that reminded you of holidays and abundance. You take a sip yourself, and the flavor is comforting, almost hypnotic. The sweetness of the milk, the warmth of the spice, the faint bitterness of nutmeg, it all blends into something that makes your shoulders loosen. Around you, the household settles. The fire glows low, the curtains are drawn tight against the damp London night, and the air smells like comfort. A little plate of biscuits appears on the table because apparently nothing in this house is done halfway. One man jokes that the milk is so heavily spiced he could probably serve it at Christmas, and no one would notice. Another says he dreams more sweetly on nights when cinnamon is involved. You smile, wondering if it's the spice or just the association with festivity. Either way, the mood in the room grows softer, calmer. Even the donkey outside, tethered to the fence, lets out a bray that feels suspiciously like a yawn. And you realize, for the Victorians, insomnia wasn't always treated with solemnity or grim medicine. Sometimes it was coaxed away with something indulgent, a drink that felt less like a prescription and more like a treat. Sleep, after all, comes easier when you're content, and who could resist the promise of a cup that tastes like pudding? You place the cup down, tongue tingling faintly with spice, and let the warm buzz fill your chest. Outside, the fog presses close to the window panes, but inside, the room feels like a cocoon of cinnamon-scented air. Maybe, just maybe, this spiced milk could lull you into dreams sweeter than you expected. You leave the spiced kitchen behind and follow the muffled rhythm of footsteps down another Victorian lane. The smell that greets you this time is earthy and heavy, porridge simmering slowly in a thick-bottomed pot. By now, you've learned that sleepless Victorians rarely trusted one single cure. If milk didn't do the trick on its own, it was often paired with a bowl of something warm, filling, and decidedly stodgy. Enter the midnight oatmeal porridge. You watch as a weary clerk in a sagging waistcoat ladles steaming oats into a chipped blue bowl, then pours a splash of warm milk over the top. The spoon clinks softly, the porridge thick enough to resist every stir. He sits at a small wooden table, gaslight flickering on his tired face, and eats slowly, every bite deliberate. To him, this isn't just food, it's medicine, a ritual to settle both stomach and spirit. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Victorian health reformers often praised oatmeal as a wholesome food, easy to digest and full of slow energy. Doctors recommended it not only for the poor, but for insomniacs of all classes, claiming that a warm, bland meal at night calmed the nervous system and prepared the body for rest. Quirky tidbit? Some households swore that porridge had to be stirred clockwise if you wanted it to help with sleep. Counterclockwise stirring, according to superstition, would invite nightmares or even spirits of unrest. You picture exhausted Londoners half asleep at their stoves, dutifully circling their spoons in the correct direction just to avoid any spectral trouble. Historians still argue whether porridge really aided sleep or simply filled bellies enough to make fatigue unavoidable. After all, a heavy, warm meal can make anyone drowsy, but it can also spark indigestion, leaving you tossing in bed. Was porridge a cure or a convenient excuse for a midnight snack? The record remains hazy. You lean back as the clerk finishes his bowl, sighing with the satisfaction of someone who has earned a small comfort after a long day. Outside, rain begins to patter softly on the cobblestones, adding a soothing rhythm to the quiet kitchen. The clerk rinses his bowl, blows out the gas light, and trudges upstairs, his footsteps heavy but slower now. You imagine him sinking into his mattress, body weighted with oats, hoping sleep will finally find him. Another family, just across the street, has their own variation. Bread soaked in hot milk until it turns into a mushy pudding. They call it sop, and though it looks like something a cat might reject, they swear it helps them drift off. A grandmother in a russet shawl insists that sop is gentler on the nerves than porridge. Her grandchildren wrinkle their noses but eat anyway, because in this household, grandmother's rules are law. Your modern aside? Think of this as the Victorian version of a midnight snack run to the fridge. Except instead of grabbing leftover pizza or ice cream, you're dutifully stirring oats and milk because some pamphlet told you it would make you dream more peacefully. The porridge cools, the lamps dim, and the night grows deeper. In these cramped kitchens, the combination of warm food and milk isn't just about curing insomnia, it's about carving out a moment of comfort in a noisy, restless world. For a few spoonfuls at least, the sleepless find something resembling peace. The kitchens grow quiet now, but when you push open the door of the next Victorian home, the air is sharp with something stronger than oats or cinnamon. A decanter sits on a table, glass catching the glow of lamplight, and beside it a small jug of milk. Tonight's cure is not plain or spiced or sweet. It is laudanum mixed with milk, a concoction both soothing and dangerous. You watch as a man with hollow eyes measures a few drops from the decanter into his mug, stirs carefully, and drinks with the solemnity of someone who knows both relief and risk. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Laudanum, a tincture of opium and alcohol, was one of the most widely available medicines in Victorian Britain. Sold freely in pharmacies and even groceries, it was prescribed for everything from coughs to stomach aches, and yes, insomnia. Doctors sometimes recommended mixing it into milk to disguise its bitterness and soften its effects. For the sleepless, it promised more than comfort. It promised oblivion. Quirky tidbit? Some households gave laudanum-laced milk not only to adults, but to children who wouldn't sleep. Imagine tucking in your toddler with a bedtime story and a tiny opiate cocktail. It sounds shocking to modern ears, but Victorians treated it almost like giving cough syrup. Unsurprisingly, many children slept soundly, perhaps too soundly. Historians still argue whether Victorian physicians genuinely understood the addictive potential of laudanum or simply ignored it. Some medical men warned about opium habits, while others wrote glowing testimonials about how a few drops brought restful nights without apparent harm. The line between medicine and poison was thin, and often blurred by desperation. You sit quietly as the man finishes his drink, his shoulders loosening, his breath slowing. Across the street, a woman in a teal shawl does the same, adding honey to her laudanum milk mix to soften the taste. Her husband watches nervously, muttering that she relies on it too often. She shrugs, sipping anyway, because the relief is immediate and priceless. Your modern aside, think of this as the Victorian equivalent of reaching for prescription sleep meds, but without dosage labels, safety caps, or doctors double-checking your history. Just a teaspoon here, a spoonful there, and hope for the best. The donkeys tethered outside bray softly, as if aware of the strangeness within. The city hums on, carriages rattling, church bells chiming faintly in the distance. But in these shadowed rooms, sleep arrives not from milk alone, but from milk laced with something darker. And yet, to those who drink, it feels like salvation. You glance again at the decanter on the table, the liquid inside glowing amber.
The line between cure and curse sits right there, in glass and porcelain, waiting for the desperate.
You realize that Victorian insomnia cures were never just about comfort. They were about control, about forcing the body to obey when the mind refused. The lamplight flickers lower. The man's head droops. The woman sighs into her pillow, and silence finally claims their houses. You walk away slowly, unsettled but thoughtful, the faint smell of opium and warm milk clinging to your imagination. The smell of laudanum lingers unpleasantly in your memory, but the next house greets you with steam and soap. Here, the cure for insomnia isn't swallowed, it's soaked. A brass tub gleams in the center of a narrow bathroom, water warmed by coal fire and carefully tested by hand. A jug of milk waits on the nightstand in the adjoining room, but first comes the ritual of bathing before bed. You watch as a tired gentleman lowers himself into the tub, sighing as if his bones are exhaling. The water ripples, candlelight dancing across its surface. His wife pours a final jug of tepid water over his shoulders, muttering that hot baths overstimulate the blood, but cool ones chill the nerves. So tepid is the only proper path to sleep. The logic is dubious, but the relaxation is real. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Victorian doctors often recommended warm or lukewarm baths to calm the nervous system and prepare the body for rest. Medical guides described bathing as a way to balance circulation, reduce overheating of the brain, and reset the restless insomniac. Some even claimed the skin absorbed calming properties from the water itself. Quirky tidbit? Certain manuals advised adding herbs or even a splash of milk directly into the bath water. One particularly earnest author claimed that bathing in diluted milk replicates the comfort of infancy and thus restores natural slumber. You imagine scrubbing down in a tub of milk like Cleopatra, except instead of royal luxury, it's just another weary Londoner hoping not to toss all night. Historians still argue whether these bathing rituals truly cured sleeplessness or whether they simply signaled relaxation to a tense body. Some point to the physiological effects of warm water on muscles, while others dismiss it as pure ritual. The truth probably lies somewhere between. Ritual plus comfort equals the illusion of healing. You sit on a wooden stool, the air thick with steam, listening to the sound of dripping water. The gentleman closes his eyes, shoulders sinking deeper, while his wife fusses over towels warming by the hearth. Soon, he climbs out, skin flushed, and slips into his robe. The bath leaves him loose-limbed, slower, already leaning toward drowsiness. In the adjoining room, the waiting cup of milk completes the ritual. He drinks slowly, candle flame flickering in his eyes, before pulling the heavy coverlet over himself. Within minutes, his breathing evens, the bath and the milk together carrying him into the quiet night. Your modern aside, it's not so different from today's self-care routines, bubble baths, herbal teas, melatonin gummies. Only here, the science was shaky, the plumbing primitive, and the milk always waiting patiently at the finish line. As you step back into the corridor, the steam curls around you like fog, warm and strangely comforting. Perhaps you think of all the cures so far, this one feels the most plausible. After all, who hasn't felt sleepier after a long soak? The air grows cooler as you leave behind the steamy bathroom and step into the hush of a Victorian bedroom, where the cure is not in the cup, but in the environment. Here, the focus shifts from what goes into the body to what surrounds it. Heavy curtains drape from ceiling to floor, shutting out both the noise of horses on the street and the persistent flicker of gaslight outside. Quilts lie piled high on the bed, stitched in rich indigo and russet tones, as though weight itself might pin a restless sleeper into stillness. A mainstream historical fact, by the mid-19th century, Victorians grew fascinated with the idea of sleep hygiene, though they would not have used the modern term. Medical manuals encouraged the creation of a controlled sleep environment. Thick curtains to block light, layers of blankets for warmth, and carefully arranged pillows to support posture. The logic was that if the body was cocooned, the mind might follow. And the quirky tidbit. Some families believed that curtains must be drawn with a particular fold to trap bad dreams. One superstition insisted that if the pleats faced inward, nightmares could crawl through the folds like insects. Mothers scolded children for inviting the bad ones by drawing curtains carelessly. You imagine a poor maid repleating drapes at midnight because her mistress swore she felt a nightmare creeping in. Historians still argue whether the elaborate sleep chambers of the middle and upper classes truly reflected medical advice, or were more about status and display? Was it really about keeping insomnia at bay, or simply about showing off layers of imported textiles? In the end, the result was the same: a fortress of fabric where rest might hopefully descend. You watch as a weary merchant lowers himself into bed. His wife fusses with the curtains, ensuring every gap is sealed, while a servant stokes the small fire in the grate. Outside, carriages clatter, but inside, the silence is near absolute. The man pulls the blankets up to his chin, their weight pressing down like a gentle hand. He closes his eyes, perhaps imagining the darkness itself as medicine. And there's the milk again, waiting loyally on the bedside table. The merchant sips it with ritual precision, setting the cup down as though completing the final step in a sacred process. Only then does he settle into the nest of blankets, his breathing evening as the layers of fabric and warmth coax him toward slumber. Your modern aside, this isn't so different from weighted blankets or blackout curtains today. Humans haven't really changed. We still try to outwit our restless minds with fabric, weight, and darkness. The Victorians just did it with a bit more velvet and superstition. You sit quietly in the corner of the room, watching as the fire crackles down to embers, the curtains ripple faintly in the draft, and the weight of blankets presses a sleepless century into silence. The fabric-heavy bedroom fades into quiet, and soon you find yourself in a smaller, humbler chamber, where another nightly ritual unfolds. Not with curtains or baths, but with whispered words. Here, sleep is sought through devotion. A woman kneels beside her bed, candlelight soft against her saffron shawl, hands folded neatly as she recites a bedtime prayer. On the table beside her rests the now familiar mug of warm milk, waiting like a silent participant in the ritual. A mainstream historical fact: in Victorian households, prayer before bed was deeply ingrained. Many believed restless nights were not just physical but spiritual, the soul unsettled by worry or sin. Evening devotions were thought to calm the mind, focus the heart, and invite divine protection for the hours of unconsciousness. For children especially, prayer and warm milk went hand in hand, a blend of faith and comfort. Quirky tidbit: some families blessed the milk itself, treating it almost like a holy draught. Parents told children that God would sweeten the dreams hidden in the cup. In rural parishes, it wasn't uncommon for clergymen to joke that they'd prescribed more mugs of milk than sermons for insomniacs. You picture a priest chuckling, "Take 2 prayers and a pint, and see me in the morning." Historians still argue whether prayer truly alleviated insomnia or whether it simply acted as a mental pause, slowing frantic thoughts enough to make drowsiness possible. Skeptics dismissed it as superstition, while believers swore by its calming power. The debate lingers, but in the stillness of this room, you can almost feel the quiet focus prayer brings. You watch as the woman finishes her whispered verses, her voice fading into the hum of the night. She lifts the cup, sips slowly, and sets it down again, crossing herself before climbing under a quilt. The room smells faintly of beeswax, candles, and warm dairy, the two combining into a strangely soothing atmosphere. Her husband, already in bed, murmurs his own shorter version of the prayer, perhaps out of genuine faith, perhaps out of habit, and soon the couple lies side by side, their breaths falling into rhythm. The candle gutters low, and for a brief moment the silence feels almost sacred, as if the act of prayer itself has wrapped the room in a blanket thicker than wool. Your modern aside, think of this as the Victorian version of meditation apps. Only instead of a soothing voice guiding your breathing, it was the Lord's Prayer and a flickering taper candle. Different words, same goal, quieting the restless storm inside your skull, long enough for sleep to sneak in. As you step softly out of the chamber, you glance once more at the cooling cup on the table, its surface reflecting the last glow of candlelight. Faith, milk, and silence together make a trinity of sleep, humble yet enduring, even as the world outside clatters restlessly on. The faint echo of whispered prayers fades as you follow the rhythm of bells and footsteps down another Victorian street, until you stumble upon a group of men gathered in a modest parlor. No curtains drawn, no milk cups steaming on the table yet, just a curious scene of limbs stretching, joints cracking, and faces pinched in concentration. Tonight's insomnia cure is not drunk or whispered but performed, gentle exercise for the nervous. A mainstream historical fact:
Victorian medical journals often prescribed light calisthenics or stretching to ease sleeplessness. Doctors warned against vigorous exertion at night. It was thought to inflame the blood and worsen nervous agitation. But mild, deliberate movements were believed to steady the circulation and relax the muscles, creating a bridge between wakefulness and sleep. Quirky tidbit? One popular manual suggested that sufferers should mimic the act of slowly sawing wood in midair, as the repetitive, mechanical motion supposedly lulled the brain. Imagine a row of sleepless Londoners swaying back and forth, invisible saws in hand, while their families looked on in bemusement. If nothing else, it probably provided the rest of the household with a bedtime laugh. Historians still argue whether these nighttime stretches truly aided sleep, or whether they were simply another way to give anxious people something to do when lying still proved impossible. Some insist the physical relief was genuine. Others see it as ritualized distraction. You stand by the door as the men bend, stretch, and roll their shoulders, their waistcoats creaking faintly. One tilts forward, touching his toes, then pauses with a groan that suggests this cure is as much pain as benefit. Another flaps his arms lazily, muttering that the doctor swore it would help him empty his thoughts. Their leader demonstrates a slow bow, then motions for everyone to follow, as though they are a congregation of sleepless parishioners worshiping at the altar of flexibility. After the exercises, mugs of warm milk finally appear, as if to reward the effort. The men sip gratefully, cheeks flushed, bodies slightly looser. One jokes that the milk tastes sweeter after pretending to chop wood for 10 minutes. Another claims he could fall asleep right there on the rug, though his smirk suggests he's exaggerating. Your modern aside, picture this as the Victorian precursor to yoga apps, except instead of calming ocean sounds, you get a physician reminding you not to swing your arms too briskly, lest you undo the benefits. The room slowly quiets. Bodies sink into chairs, eyelids droop, and the milk cups empty. The air is thick with warmth, faint sweat, and dairy. You watch as even the most skeptical of the group yawns, stretches once more, and admits, perhaps there is something in it. And so, amid the flicker of lamplight and the faint smell of coal smoke, gentle exercise and warm milk merge into a peculiar duet, a dance of movement and stillness meant to coax weary Victorians into long-sought rest. The sound of creaking joints and invisible wood sawing fades behind you as you drift into another parlor, this one brighter and more convivial. The fire glows cheerfully, and the air carries the buttery scent of biscuits paired with the ever-present steam of milk. Here, insomnia isn't battled with grim determination, but with company. You watch as family and friends gather, cups in hand, plates of biscuits on their laps, while someone clears his throat to begin reading aloud. A mainstream historical fact, reading aloud was a common Victorian pastime, and it often doubled as a sleep aid. Families gathered at night to hear sermons, poems, or serialized novels delivered in measured, soothing tones. Doctors occasionally recommended the practice for insomniacs, believing the gentle rhythm of a trusted voice helped distract the mind from its own racing thoughts. Quirky tidbit? Some households had what they called a sleep reader, a relative with a voice so monotonous that within 10 minutes the audience was yawning. Far from being an insult, it was a valued skill. Imagine being praised for having the dullest reading voice in the county. Historians still argue whether the act of reading aloud truly promoted sleep, or whether it simply masked the broader social need for comfort and companionship. After all, was it the story itself that calmed the listener, or the presence of family, biscuits, and milk to soften the night? You take a seat as the reader begins a slow recitation of Tennyson, the verses rolling like waves against the hush of the room. The cadence is steady, the crackle of the fire steady, the clink of porcelain steady. A child giggles sleepily before resting her head against her mother's lap, crumbs of biscuit still on her lips. The father sips milk, eyes half closing, until even he begins to nod along with the rhythm of the poem. The donkeys tethered outside shift their hooves, bells chiming faintly as if joining the recitation. Inside, the warmth deepens. Another poem follows, then a short fable, until eyelids sag all around the room. The reader himself grows drowsy, words blurring as his own voice lulls him. Your modern aside, think of this as the Victorian version of an audiobook, but instead of earbuds and Bluetooth speakers, you have a droning uncle, a crackling fire, and milk mustaches all around. The biscuits are finished, the cups drained, and one by one, chairs are abandoned for bed. You remain a moment longer, feeling the atmosphere thicken with the drowsy contentment of company. Sleep here isn't fought with stern rules or opiates, but coaxed with warmth, shared words, and the clink of crockery. As the final candle is snuffed, the parlor fades into darkness, leaving only the memory of verses carried on milk-sweetened breath. The parlor's warmth fades behind you, replaced by the cool rush of country air as you find yourself far from London's smoke and soot. The road is lined with hedgerows, the fields dotted with cows and sleepy farmhouses. For many Victorians, especially those with money and restless minds, the cure for insomnia wasn't just warm milk at home. It was warm milk at the source, taken fresh from the countryside, with the promise that rural air itself could heal what the city broke. A mainstream historical fact. Physicians frequently prescribed change of air as a remedy for a variety of nervous complaints, including insomnia. Wealthy families sent their sleepless sons and daughters to country estates or seaside cottages, convinced that cleaner skies, quiet nights, and fresh dairy would restore them. Rural retreats became a cornerstone of Victorian health culture, part medicine, part holiday. Quirky tidbit? Some doctors insisted that milk straight from the cow was more soporific than milk boiled or stored. Families took this quite literally. There are reports of patients being led to barns in their nightclothes to drink milk as it steamed, hoping the raw warmth would knock them out before they returned to bed. You imagine shivering aristocrats clutching tin mugs in the dark, trying not to look the cow in the eye. Historians still argue whether these retreats truly cured insomnia or simply distracted sufferers with novelty and gentler surroundings. Was it the milk, the air, or just the relief of being away from London's incessant noise? The debate continues, though the testimonials are full of grateful sighs and poetic descriptions of starlit fields. You walk now into a farmhouse kitchen where a young woman, cheeks flushed from fresh air, drinks her evening cup of milk while her aunt fusses about open windows. "You must let the breeze in," the aunt insists. "City lungs need clearing before city minds can rest." The windows are thrown wide, and the scent of hay and damp grass fills the room. Outside, owls call softly, a soundtrack far gentler than carriage wheels. In another room, a patient writes in her diary that she finally slept through the night, thanks to pure cream, warm from the udder. Whether it was the cream, the diary, or sheer exhaustion from a countryside walk, she doesn't say, but her relief is palpable. Your modern aside, it's like booking a wellness retreat today, only instead of smoothies and yoga mats, you get cows, hay, and farm-fresh milk in a tin cup. Less Instagram-worthy perhaps, but strangely similar in spirit. The farmhouse quiets as night settles fully. Stars pierce the darkness, the fields sway in a soft wind, and in bed after bed, insomniacs breathe a little easier, convinced that rural rhythms have finally stilled their restless nerves. And maybe, in this soft cocoon of milk and meadow, they're right. The quiet of the countryside lingers, but the next room you step into is filled not with hay-scented air, but with the faint metallic buzz of contraptions. This is no cozy farmhouse. It's a laboratory-like chamber where desperate insomniacs strap themselves into belts, sit beneath coils, and await the hum of electricity or magnets to chase away their sleepless nights. Yes, you've stumbled upon the age of Victorian gadgetry, where cures for insomnia included electric belts and magnetic charms, often accompanied, of course, by a glass of milk. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the late 19th century, electricity was marketed as a miracle for nearly every ailment. Companies sold electrotherapeutic devices to stimulate the nerves, claiming they could restore balance and calm, leading to better sleep. Magnetic bracelets and padded belts were equally popular, worn at night to steady what Victorians called the currents of the body. Quirky tidbit? Some of these belts came with glowing testimonials that promised users would dream more vividly, or even gain prophetic insight while asleep. Imagine buying a gadget not only to rest, but to see the future in your dreams. Half cure, half fortune-telling, all powered by a crank and a wire. Historians still argue whether patients truly believed in the science of these machines, or whether they simply enjoyed the theater of progress. Was it electricity itself that soothed, or the faith that modern technology could finally tame the mind? You watch now as a man tightens a wide, brass-studded belt around his waist, the faint hum of current making his mustache quiver. His wife sits nearby with a magnet strapped to her wrist, sipping warm milk while reading the instruction manual. The scene is equal parts medical experiment and comedy sketch. "Do you feel calmer?" she asks. He frowns. "I feel tinglier." They both chuckle, but neither seems ready to abandon hope.
In another corner, a young woman leans back in a chair as a friend winds a crank, sending a mild shock through coils placed at her temples. She shivers, gulps down a mouthful of milk, and declares herself already drowsier. Whether it's the current or the placebo, no one dares question her. Your modern aside, think of these devices as the Victorian version of sleep apps or wearable trackers, expensive, questionably effective, but deeply reassuring to those who buy them. And just like today, the advertising was often better than the product. The buzzing slows, the belts are unbuckled, the magnets set aside. Cups of milk are drained, shoulders unclench, and the room grows dim. Whether science or superstition, the ritual feels convincing, and that perhaps was cure enough. The faint metallic hum of electric belts fades as you step into a different Victorian space, not a laboratory, but the bustling pages of a newspaper. Here, the insomnia cure isn't sipped in silence or strapped on with wires. It's shouted from headlines and tucked into elegant print. Sleepy time advertisements leap from every corner, promising relief in powders, tonics, and of course additions to your nightly mug of milk. A mainstream historical fact. The late Victorian era saw a surge in patent medicines, many of them marketed specifically for sleeplessness. Newspaper ads boasted miracle powders that could be stirred into warm milk, claiming they would quiet the nerves and bring the heaviest eyelids. The market was crowded, the claims extravagant, and regulation almost non-existent. Quirky tidbit: some powders were little more than ground sugar and chamomile, while others hid more dramatic ingredients, like bromides, opiates, or alcohol. One popular brand even promised that it induced the sweetest slumber without disturbing the digestion, though critics joked that it worked mainly because you passed out before worrying about your stomach. Historians still argue whether these advertisements reflected genuine public demand or created it. Did Victorians truly believe their sleeplessness required powders? Or were they coaxed into seeing every restless night as a problem to be solved with a purchase? The line between need and marketing blur as you trace the curling fonts and glowing testimonials. You picture a tired clerk poring over the evening paper by lamplight. His eyes fall on an ad featuring a cherubic child cradling a cup of steaming milk beneath bold words, "Sleep restored." He sighs, fishes a coin from his pocket, and resolves to try the powder by week's end. Across town, a widow reads a similar ad, her skepticism warring with her exhaustion. The promise of rest is tempting, the price justifiable. And then there are the ads that tug shamelessly at emotion. For mothers whose babes cry through the night, this powder brings peace to child and parent alike. You shiver at the thought, recalling laudanum milk, but understand how desperation could win out over caution. Your modern aside, this is the Victorian version of scrolling through wellness ads online. Sleep gummies, weighted blankets, miracle teas, only instead of influencers, you had engravings of angels sprinkling powder into porcelain cups. Different packaging, same pitch. The paper rustles, the lamplight dims, and you realize that even in print, sleeplessness was commodified, packaged, and sold. Every ad, every testimonial, every powder was less about milk and more about hope. Hope that with the right mixture, silence and dreams might finally descend. The crinkle of newspaper pages fades as you step into a more regimented world. No cozy parlors or whimsical ads here. Instead, you find yourself in a sanatorium, its long corridors echoing with footsteps and the faint clink of tin cups. Here, insomnia is treated not as a nuisance, but as part of a larger medical regimen. Rows of patients shuffle forward, each handed the same steaming mug of warm milk before lights out, as though the empire itself has standardized bedtime. A mainstream historical fact. By the late 19th century, sanatoriums and rest homes became increasingly common for treating nervous disorders, including chronic insomnia. Patients followed strict routines, meals at precise hours, outdoor walks at scheduled times, and bedtime rituals carefully enforced. Milk, praised as both nourishing and calming,
was often part of these routines, dispensed with the same seriousness as any medicine. Quirky tidbit? Some institutions went further, serving milk in exact measured doses and recording whether patients fell asleep within the hour. Imagine a nurse jotting in a ledger. 2 cups consumed, slumber achieved at 10 past 11. Sleep was charted like rainfall, a measurable outcome of dairy discipline. Historians still argue whether these sanatorium practices genuinely helped patients or merely imposed order on chaos. Was the improvement due to milk and rest, or simply the comfort of being removed from the exhausting demands of Victorian life? The debate lingers, scribbled in the margins of patient diaries. You walk down the corridor, the air heavy with disinfectant and the faint sweetness of milk. Patients in nightshirts sit obediently on narrow beds, sipping their nightly dose. Some gulp it down grimly, others savor it like a treat. A nurse in a teal dress moves between them, refilling cups, her footsteps steady as clockwork. In the corner, a patient mutters that he dreams more peacefully when he holds the cup in both hands, as though it were a charm. Another patient sighs dramatically, complaining that the milk tastes thin and lifeless compared to what he drank at home. His neighbor shushes him, whispering that complaints might cost him his privileges. Around them, the atmosphere is one of weary compliance, less about comfort, more about routine. Your modern aside, think of this as the Victorian equivalent of a sleep clinic, except instead of electrodes and REM monitors, you get stern matrons with ledgers and identical mugs of lukewarm milk. The lights dim, beds creak as patients settle. The nurse closes her ledger with a snap, satisfied that the ritual has been followed. And as the sanatorium quiets, you realize that for these patients, sleep is not just personal relief. It's institutionalized, standardized, measured, and rationed out in mugs of milk like a medicine of empire. The sanatorium's regimented silence fades, and you drift into a far more chaotic street scene. Here, insomnia is still a problem, but the cures look very different depending on whose hands hold the cup. The Victorian class divide is alive even in sleeplessness, shaping whether your nightly milk is rich cream poured into porcelain, or a thin, watered-down ladle scooped into a chipped mug. A mainstream historical fact. In 19th century Britain, milk was not equally accessible to all. The wealthy consumed clotted cream, fresh dairy, and even imported specialties, while the working poor often made do with watered milk sold from dubious vendors. Medical guides praised milk as a cure for nerves and insomnia, but for many households, its quality was as uncertain as its effects. Quirky tidbit. Some Londoners accused milk sellers of stretching their product not only with water, but with chalk or flour, claiming it made the liquid look thicker. Imagine trudging home exhausted, only to realize your bedtime cure was equal parts dairy and dishonest chemistry. No wonder some poor souls never found sleep. Historians still argue whether the middle and upper classes truly believed in milk's healing powers, or whether they simply embraced it as part of a broader culture of domestic comfort. For the poor, milk was often too expensive to waste on sleepless nights, reserved instead for children or the ill. Thus, insomnia cures became a quiet marker of privilege, visible in the thickness of cream. You watch now as a factory worker returns home, shoulders slumped, and pours a splash of thin milk into a tin mug. His wife scolds him gently for using it, reminding him the children need it more. He shrugs, gulps it down, and crawls into bed anyway, the bitter taste of compromise on his tongue. Across town, a banker's wife sits in a bedroom draped with velvet, sipping hot milk frothed into near custard, served on a silver tray by a maid. The contrast is sharp, and sleep, it seems, is classed along with everything else. Your modern aside, think of it like comparing a luxury sleep aid, silk sheets, lavender sprays, weighted blankets, to a threadbare pillow and a noisy tenement. Both aim for rest, but one is gilded, while the other is bare survival. The city outside hums restlessly, but within these divided homes, the nightly ritual of milk carries on. Thin or thick, porcelain or tin, each cup holds the same fragile hope, that maybe this time the body will surrender and the weary mind will finally rest. The sharp contrast of the rich cream and watered chalk fades as you step into a quieter drawing room, where the soft murmur of voices makes clear who is most often singled out in the Victorian war against sleeplessness: women. Here, the milk cure is not just about comfort, it's about controlling what doctors called women's nerves. You watch as a physician, waistcoat gleaming, solemnly insists that a cup of warm milk will calm the delicate constitution of his female patient. She rolls her eyes but drinks anyway. A mainstream historical fact. Victorian medicine often pathologized women's sleep problems under the label of hysteria or nervous disorders. Doctors frequently recommended warm milk, mild sedatives, or strict rest as treatments, claiming these would soothe their allegedly fragile systems. Sleep disturbances were seen less as individual struggles and more as proof of gendered weakness. Quirky tidbit? Some doctors went so far as to prescribe milk baths for women, claiming the immersion would restore feminine serenity. Imagine lying in a tub of lukewarm dairy while your husband and the doctor exchange smug nods in the corner. Not exactly the spa day anyone requested. Historians still argue whether these prescriptions were genuine attempts to treat insomnia or thinly veiled ways of reinforcing patriarchal control. Was the milk really for sleep or for keeping women docile under the guise of medicine? The debate simmers like the milk itself, unresolved but telling. You glance at the room around you. Women in indigo and teal dresses sip obediently from porcelain cups, while men debate their nerves as though the patients are not present. One woman whispers to her sister that the milk does little except make her stomach heavy. Another confesses that she adds brandy when the doctor isn't looking, which, unsurprisingly, works far better. Their suppressed laughter feels like rebellion bubbling under the surface. Your modern aside, this is the Victorian equivalent of being told to just relax when you complain of burnout. Only instead of a wellness app suggestion, it's a stern man with a mustache offering you a mug of milk and declaring the case solved. The room grows still as the women finish their cups, resigned but unconvinced. They retreat to their beds, their so-called nerves calmed not by the milk, but by the solidarity of shared skepticism. And you, watching from the corner, sense that sleeplessness was never just about the body. It was about power, too, and whose version of rest mattered enough to be taken seriously. The quiet resentment of the women's parlor fades as you follow the faint scratching of pens across paper. You enter a dim study, its air heavy with ink and lamplight, where writers and poets sit hunched at desks, mugs of milk cooling beside them. For these insomniacs, milk is not just a cure but a companion, a ritual that keeps them tethered while their minds refuse to rest. A mainstream historical fact. Many Victorian authors wrote openly about their struggles with sleeplessness. Charles Dickens, for instance, famously took long night walks through London when he could not sleep. Others, less inclined to wander, turned to warm drinks, milk, cocoa, or spiced tonics, as part of their nightly battles against restlessness. These cups often appeared in letters and diaries, humble props in the theater of creativity. Quirky tidbit. One poet claimed he only found inspiration after sipping milk laced with nutmeg, boasting that the spice gave his verses a softer meter. Another novelist, less romantic, grumbled that warm milk simply made his handwriting wobblier. Between the two, you suspect the milk was less muse than excuse. Historians still argue whether insomnia fueled Victorian creativity or stifled it. Did sleepless nights produce greater literature, or did the haze of fatigue drag writers down? Some suggest the very culture of insomnia, milk, lamps, and long hours, shaped the melancholy tone of much 19th century writing. You lean against a bookcase as one author dips his quill, sipping from his mug before scribbling another line. His wife dozes in the next room, unaware of his muttered verses. Another writer reads aloud a stanza to the donkeys outside. Yes, there's always a donkey somewhere, who flick their ears but offer no applause. The room is quiet but alive, words flowing in tandem with the steam rising from mugs. Your modern aside? Think of this as the Victorian prototype for staying up late with coffee while hammering away at a keyboard. Except instead of caffeine and screen glow, it's tepid milk, scratching quills, and oil lamps guttering at 3 a.m. The night stretches on, sentences pile up, and eventually the pens grow heavy in weary hands. The mugs stand empty, their rims stained faintly, as if they too have absorbed a little of the restless energy. For these sleepless writers, the cure was never complete, but at least the milk kept them company as their minds refused to quit. The scratch of quills fades, and you find yourself stepping into a different kind of chamber, brighter, more clinical, humming with the confidence of modern science. Here, the mugs of milk are fewer, their steam overshadowed by the sharp scent of chemicals and the clink of glass vials. The Victorian milk cure is waning, and a new era of sedatives and pharmaceuticals begins to take its place. A mainstream historical fact: by the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the medical profession increasingly favored chemical sleep aids over traditional remedies like milk. Bromides, chloral hydrate, and later barbiturates became common prescriptions, marketed as more reliable and scientifically grounded than household rituals. Warm milk, once celebrated in medical texts, began to slip into the realm of quaint tradition. Quirky tidbit? Some physicians mocked the milk cure openly, calling it a nursery sop for infants, not a draft for men. One particularly snide doctor insisted that only those too timid for real medicine clung to warm milk at night. You can almost hear the Victorian equivalent of an eye roll in his published remarks. Historians still argue whether this shift was genuine progress or simply a swing from one imperfect solution to another. Did chemical sedatives truly offer better sleep, or did they trade one problem, ineffectiveness, for another, dependency and side effects? The debate continues, scribbled across medical journals and patient testimonies alike. You glance at a physician's desk. Bottles labeled chloral and bromide, a ledger noting dosages, a faintly dusty cup of milk shoved aside as though embarrassed to remain. Patients sit in stiff chairs, listening solemnly as doctors explain how science has advanced, how they no longer need childish rituals when chemistry can command sleep. Yet in the corner, a nurse still offers a warm cup to one anxious woman who refuses the stronger drugs. She drinks gratefully, whispering that she trusts milk more than anything bottled. The nurse smiles, perhaps quietly agreeing. Your modern aside, this is like the shift from chamomile tea to prescription sleep meds today, tradition yielding to pharmaceuticals, though many still cling to the gentler path. The room quiets as patients shuffle to their beds, some with measured doses, others with mugs. Science may be marching forward, but in the dimness of the ward, milk still lingers like a ghost of comfort, soft and stubborn against the march of progress. The smell of chemicals and the clink of glass fade, and you step once more into the broader sweep of the world. The carriages are quieter now, the gas lamps dimmer, as if even the restless city has at last surrendered to the night. You think of the countless mugs of warm milk poured across a century, some plain, some spiced, some laced with dangerous additives, all carried by the same fragile hope that sleep might finally come. A mainstream historical fact. Though medical science eventually left behind milk as a primary cure for insomnia, the habit never vanished entirely. Even in the 20th century, doctors still recommended it, and households passed the ritual down. The idea of warm milk as a bedtime comfort remains lodged in cultural memory, its Victorian roots echoing softly each time someone reaches for a mug before bed. Quirky tidbit? Advertisements from the early 1900s promoted milk cocoa and malted milk as scientifically improved bedtime drinks, blending the old ritual with new flavors. The milk cure never truly died, it just reinvented itself with sweeter branding. Historians still argue whether warm milk survives because it works physiologically or simply because it feels comforting. Is it the tryptophan, the warmth, or pure nostalgia that calms the mind? Perhaps the Victorians asked the same question, without the vocabulary of neurotransmitters to answer it. You stroll through a modern street now, neon replacing gas lamps, but the insomnia feels familiar. People scroll on glowing screens, mutter about stress, or toss in tangled sheets. And yet, somewhere in the mix, someone heats a pan of milk, sprinkles in nutmeg, and carries forward a ritual older than they realize. The line from Victorian kitchens to now is unbroken, an unassuming thread of comfort passed hand to hand, cup to cup. Your modern aside, it's funny, isn't it? After centuries of experiments, gadgets, pills, and powders, one of the most enduring sleep cures is still just milk, gentle, bland, and stubbornly persistent. Maybe that's because, deep down, what we really need isn't chemistry, but comfort. The donkeys are long gone, the carriages silenced, but the image remains. A candlelit table, a steaming mug, a weary soul sipping slowly and waiting for dreams. You let yourself drift into that image, feeling the same warmth slide into your chest, and the centuries collapse into silence. And now, as the journey closes, you feel the edges of history blur into something softer, gentler. The clatter of carriages, the hiss of gas lamps, the muttered complaints of insomniacs, all of it grows faint like echoes fading into fog. What lingers instead is the rhythm, the simple repetitive comfort of a ritual that has outlasted empires. A hand stirring milk, a cup warming the palms, a breath slowing as the warmth spreads through the body. You picture it now, not in the noise of London streets or the strict halls of sanatoriums, but in a quiet room of your own. Curtains drawn, lamp dimmed, a steady hum in the background. The cup rests beside you, steam curling lazily upward, carrying not just the scent of milk, but centuries of memory, farmhouses, parlors, wards, and weary studies, all joined together by the same quiet hope for sleep. Your breath falls into rhythm with that image, longer and slower, as though your body is joining the very cadence of the story. The warmth presses gently, not like a weight, but like a blanket laid across your shoulders. It says, "You've done enough, you've seen enough, you can let go now." The donkeys are gone, the doctors are gone, the advertisements crumbled into dust. What remains is you, the night, and the quiet comfort of a tradition that refuses to die. You sip once more in your imagination, the taste bland but reassuring, and with it comes a heaviness, not of burden, but of rest. So let the centuries drift away, let the voices fade, let the warmth carry you. The road is finished, the night is deep, and the story has slowed to silence. Sleep waits now, patient and near.